An ecosystem can be visualized as a functional unit of nature where living organisms interact among themselves and also with the surrounding physical environment. An ecosystem maybe is a functional unit of nature where living organisms interact among themselves and also with the surrounding physical environment. Ecosystem varies greatly in size from a small pond to a large forest or a sea. Many ecologists regard the entire biosphere as a global ecosystem. As a composed of all local ecosystems on Earth. Since this ecosystem is too much big and complex to be studied at one time, it is convenient to divide it into two basic categories, namely terrestrial and aquatic. Forest, grassland, and the desert are some examples of the terrestrial ecosystem. Pond, lake, wetland, river, and the estuary are some of the examples of the aquatic ecosystem. Crop fields and an aquarium may also be considered as man-made ecosystems. Man-made ecosystems, terrestrial, aquatic ecosystem, pond, lake, wetland, river, estuary, terrestrial ecosystem में आते हैं forest, grassland and the desert are some examples of the terrestrial ecosystems. Pond, lake, crop fields and the aquarium may be regarded as an man-made ecosystems. We first look at the structure of ecosystem in order to appreciate the input, that is productivity, transfer of energy, that is food chain, food web, nutrient cycling, and the output, that is degradation and the energy loss. We will look also at the relationship cycles, chains, webs that are created as a result of these energy flows within the system and their relationship. Ecosystem can be visualized as a functional unit of nature where living organisms interact among themselves and also with the surrounding physical environment. Ecosystem varies greatly in size from a small pond to a large forest. Many ecologists regard this entire biosphere as a global ecosystem. Terrestrial and aquatic, forest, grassland, and desert are terrestrial ecosystems, and pond, lake, wetland. Wetland is an aquatic ecosystem. River is an estuary is an aquatic ecosystem. Crop field and aquarium are the man-made ecosystems. Ecosystem structure and function. In chapter 13, you have looked at the various components of the environment, that is biotic and abiotic. You studied how the individual biotic and the abiotic factors affected each other and other surrounding. Let's look at these components in more integrated manner and see how the flow of energy takes place within these components of the ecosystem. Interaction of the biotic and the abiotic components result in a physical structure that is characteristic for each type of ecosystem. Identification and the enumeration of plant and the animal species of an ecosystem gives it a species composition. Vertical distribution of the different species. Vertical, not horizontal, but vertical distribution of the different species occupying different levels in an ecosystem is called stratification. Vertical distribution of the species occupying different levels in an ecosystem is called stratification. Stratification is simply the vertical distribution of the species in a particular ecosystem. For example, trees occupy top vertical strata or layer of a forest. Shrubs the second, and herbs and the grass occupy the bottom layer. Shrubs the second, trees occupy the layer, then shrubs, then the grasses and other herbs. Trees, then shrubs, and top layer. This vertical distribution of the species in a particular ecosystem is called stratification. Interaction of the biotic and abiotic components result in a physical structure that is a character of each type of the ecosystem. Identification and enumeration of plant and animal species gives it a species composition. Vertical distribution of the different type of species occupy different levels is called stratification. For example, the trees occupy the top vertical strata or the layer of the forest. Shrub is the second, and the grass is the bottom layer. Trees occupy the topmost, then the shrubs, and then the herbs and the grasses. Biotic and the abiotic in the physical and the structure of the year. Vertical, it's not horizontal, it is a vertical distribution of the different species occupying different levels called stratification. Now the components of the ecosystem. The components of an ecosystem are seen to function as a unit. The components of the ecosystem are seen to function as a unit when you consider the following aspects. The first one is productivity, then it is decomposition. Decomposition के बाद होता है energy flow, उसके बाद nutrient cycling. Productivity, decomposition, energy flow, and the nutrient cycling. Productivity. To understand this, the ethos of an ecosystem, let us take a small point as an example. This is fairly a self-sustainable unit. This is a self-sustainable unit, that is, it is an ecosystem. ecosystem में particular components क्या क्या होते हैं? Productivity, उसके बाद decomposition, उसके बाद productivity, decomposition, energy flow, and the nutrient cycling. To understand ecosystem, let's take a small pond and an example. This is fairly a self-sustainable unit and rather simple example that explain even the complex interactions that exist that exist in an aquatic ecosystem. A pond is a shallow water body in which all the above mentioned four basic components of an ecosystem are well exhibited. The abiotic component is the water with all the dissolved inorganic and the organic substrates and the rich soil deposit at the bottom of the pond. The solar input, the cycle of the temperature, day length, and the other climatic conditions regulate the rate of function of the entire pond. The autotrophic components include the phytoplanktons, some algae, and the floating, submerged, and the marginal plants found at the edges. Mainly phytoplankton. Phytoplankton, some algae, and the floating, submerged, and the marginal plants found at the edges. The consumers are represented by the zooplanktons, the free swimming, and the bottom dwelling forms. Free swimming as well as the bottom dwelling forms. These are the consumers. The third one is the decomposers are the fungi, bacteria, and the flagellates, especially abundant in the bottom of the pond. Therefore, the decomposition are the most abundant in the bottom of a particular pond. Decomposition are the most abundant in the bottom of the pond. This system performs all the functions of an ecosystem and of a biosphere as a whole. That is conversion of the inorganic into organic material with the help of the radiant energy of the sun by autotrophs, consumption of the autotrophs by heterotrophs, that is consumed, decomposition and the mineralization of the dead matter to release them back to use for the these events are repeated over and over again. There is a unidirectional movement of energy towards the this is very important. There is a unidirectional movement of energy towards the higher tropic levels, and it is dissipation and loss as heat to the environment. There is a unidirectional movement of energy towards the higher tropic levels, and it is dissipation and as a loss heat to the environment. The autotrophic components include the phytoplankton, some algae, floating, submerged, and the marginal plants found at the edge. The consumers are present by the zooplanktons. The free swimming and the bottom dwelling forms. The decomposers are the fungi, bacteria, and flagellates, especially abundant at the bottom of the pond. Fungi, bacteria, and flagellates, especially abundant at the bottom of the pond. This system performs all the functions of the ecosystem and the biosphere as a whole. There is a conversion of the inorganic. There is a unidirectional movement of the energy towards the higher tropic levels, and it is dissipation and loss of heat to the environment. The vertical distribution of the different species occupying different levels is called stratification. The components of the ecosystem are found to function as a unit. It includes productivity, उसके बाद decomposition, उसके बाद energy flow, and last में आता है nutrient cycling. Last one, nutrient cycling. Let's take an example of a pond which acts as an ecosystem, typical ecosystem. The autotrophic components include the phytoplankton, some algae, floating, submerged, and the marginal plants on the edge. The consumers are present by the zooplankton, the free swimming, and the bottom dwelling forms. The decomposers are the fungi, bacteria, and flagellates, especially abundant in the bottom of the pond. There is a unidirectional movement of the energy towards the higher tropic levels, and it is dissipation and loss of heat to the environment. Productivity. A constant input of solar energy is the basic requirement of any ecosystem. A constant input of solar energy is the basic requirement of all ecosystems. A constant input of the solar energy is the basic requirement of all ecosystem to function and sustain. Primary production is defined. Primary production means define कितना amount produce होगा. Primary production is defined as the amount of biomass or the organic matter produced per unit area or a time period by the plants during photosynthesis. It is expressed in terms of weight, that is gram per meter square, or energy, that is kilocalories per meter square. The rate of biomass production, the rate of primary production, is called primary productivity and is expressed in the units of weight, that is gram per meter square per year, or kilocalories per meter square per year. Compare the productivity of the different ecosystems simply. What is primary production? Primary production is the defined as the amount of the biomass or the organic matter produced per unit area or a particular time period during photosynthesis. It is expressed in the units of the weight in the units of weight, that is gram per meter square, or energy, that is kilocalories per meter square. The rate of primary production, or we can say that the rate of production of the organic matter or the biomass by the plants through photosynthesis is called the primary productivity. It is expressed in terms of in the units of the gram per meter square per year or kilocalories per meter square per year. Then this primary productivity is classified accordingly into gross primary productivity and the net primary productivity. Gross primary productivity of an ecosystem is the rate of production of the organic matter during for total production कितनी होगी एक particular time में, or we can say that rate of total overall प्रोडक्शन, जिसको हम कहते हैं ग्रॉस प्राइमरी प्रोडक्ट. उस ग्रॉस प्राइमरी प्रोडक्टिविटी में कुछ प्लांट अपने के लिए कंज्यूम करता है इन द फॉर्म ऑफ रेस्पिरेशन, खुद करता है प्लांट को. ग्रॉस प्राइमरी प्रोडक्टिविटी में रेस्पिरेशन लॉसेस को माइनस करके वहाँ जो प्रोडक्टिविटी रहती है उसको कहते हैं नेट प्राइमरी प्रोडक्ट, देयरफॉर ग्रॉस प्राइमरी प्रोडक्टिविटी माइनस रेस्पिरेशन लॉस ऑफ plants equal to the net primary productivity. This net primary productivity is available for the consumers. Now the consumers creates new organic matter. That production is called as the gross secondary productivity and net secondary productivity respectively. Obviously the secondary productivity, yeah, gross secondary productivity would be less than the gross primary productivity. Net primary productivity is available for the consumption to the heterotrophs, herbivores, and the decomposers. Secondary productivity is defined as the rate of the formation of new organic matter by the consumers. New organic matter by the consumers. Primary productivity depends on the plant species inhabiting. Primary productivity depends on the constant of the soil energy is the base requirement of an ecosystem to function. As primary production is the amount of primary production is defined as the amount of the biomass or the organic matter produced per unit area over a time period by the plant during photosynthesis. It is expressed in terms of the weight, that is gram per meter square, or the energy, that is kilocalories per meter square. The rate of the biomass production is called as the productivity. It is expressed in terms of the gram per meter square per year or kilocalories per meter square per year. Units are very, very important. Then the gross primary productivity of an ecosystem is the rate of the production of the organic matter during photosynthesis. A considerable amount of the GPP is utilized by the plants in respiration. That's gross primary productivity minus the respiration loss is called net primary productivity. This net primary productivity is available biomass for the consumption to the heterotrophs and herbivores and decomposers. Secondary productivity is defined as the production of the rate of formation of the new organic matter. इसका unit भी होगा gram per meter square per year or kilocalories per meter square per year. The primary productivity depends upon the plant species, inhabiting a particular area. It also depends on a variety of environmental factors, availability of the nutrients, and the photosynthetic capacity of plants. Primary productivity depends upon various factors. First most important factor is the plants. That is the plants. The primary productivity depends on the plant species inhabiting a particular area. Plant species inhabiting a particular area. It also depends on a variety of environmental factors. Plant species inhabiting a particular area. Second one is environmental factors. Third one is availability of the nutrients, and the fourth one is the photosynthetic ability of the plants. Photosynthetic capacity of plants. Primary productivity depends on the plant species inhabiting a particular area. The second one is a variety of the environmental factors, that is environmental factors. The third one is availability of the nutrients, and the fourth one is the photosynthetic capacity of the plant. This is the primary productivity. Therefore it varies in different types of ecosystem. Therefore different types of ecosystem में different primary productivity and net primary productivity, gross primary productivity होता है. The annual net primary productivity of the whole biosphere is approximately 170 billion tons per year. एक साल में कितना total produce होता है biomass? It is 170 billion tons, 170 billion tons. इसमें से oceans और we can say aquatic part करता है खाली produce कितना 55 million tons, 55 million tons, and the rest करता है produce terrestrial. 55 million tons is produced by the oceans. Rest of course is on the land. Main reason for the low production of the ocean with your teacher, that is the productivity of the ocean is low as compared, yeah, we can say the productivity of the aquatic ecosystem is less than the productivity of the terrestrial ecosystem. Overall जो net annually productivity होते it is 170 billion 170, उसमें से खाली 55 टन प्रोड्यूस करते हैं ओशंस एंड द रेस्ट बाय द टेरेस्ट्रियल इकोसिस्टम. ये याद रखना है. 170 बिलियन टन टोटल प्रोड्यूस होते हैं, उसमें से 55 करता है प्रोड्यूस ओशन. 55 ओशंस एंड द रेस्ट. दिस वाज द प्रोडक्टिविटी में हमने पढ़ा पहले प्राइमरी प्रोडक्शन, उसको कन्वर्ट किया फिर प्राइमरी प्रोडक्टिविटी, फिर पढ़ा ग्रॉस प्राइमरी प्रोडक्टिविटी माइनस रेस्पिरेशन लॉस इज कॉल्ड नेट प्राइमरी प्रोडक्टिविटी. उसके बाद हमने पढ़ा सेकेंडरी प्रोडक्टिविटी, फिर पढ़ा हमें प्रोडक्टिविटी वेरीज फ्रॉम द इकोसिस्टम्स बिकॉज इट डिपेंड्स ऑन वेरियस फैक्टर्स लाइक द प्लांट्स, like the availability of the nutrients. The third one is the environmental factors and the fourth one is the photosynthetic capacity of the plants. उसके बाद हमने पढ़ा जो टोटल एनुअल प्राइमरी प्रोडक्टिविटी होती है बायोस्फीयर में, इट इज आउट 170 बिलियन टन. उसमें से खाली 55 बिलियन टन प्रोड्यूस करते हैं ओशंस एंड द रेस्ट. बाय दैट ऑब्वियसली द प्राइमरी प्रोडक्टिविटी और वी कैन से द प्रोडक्टिविटी ऑफ द टेरेस्ट्रियल इकोसिस्टम is more than the aquatic ecosystem. Now the decomposition. Second, it is the second component of the ecosystem. The first one is productivity, the second one is decomposition, the third one is energy flow, and the fourth one, the last one is nutrient cycling. The second one is decomposition. You may have heard of the earthworm referring to as the farmer's friend. Earthworm is called as the farmer's friend. क्यों? This is so because they help in the breakdown of the complex organic matter as well as the loosening of soil. दो चीज़ें करते हैं, एक तो ये complex organic matter को break करते हैं और soil को loosening करते हैं, जिसकी वजह से जो nutrients है वो seep करते हैं deep into the soil. Similarly, the decomposers break down the complex organic matter into the inorganic सब. अब जो organic matter हमने produce किया, हमने अब organic matter तैयार किया with the help of production, अब उस organic matter की क्या होती है? Decomposition. Similarly, decomposition break down the complex organic matter की होती है decomposed into the inorganic substrates like the carbon dioxide, like the water, like nutrients, and the process is called decomposition. Dead plants remains such as leaves, barks, flowers, and the dead remains of the animals, including fecal matter, constitute dead remains किसे कहते हैं? Dead remains of plants and animals. Dead remains of plants and animals such as leaves, bark, flowers, and dead remains of animals including the fecal matter भी detritus में आता है, fecal matter भी detritus में आता है. Dead plants remain as leaves, bark, flowers, and the dead remains of the animals including the fecal matter constitute detritus, which is the raw material for decomposition. Detritus is the raw material for decomposition. जो decomposer जिन पे एक्ट करके डिकम्पोज करते हैं उनको raw material कहते हैं यहाँ पर. And the raw material is detritus. These are the dead plants remains of plants and animals including the fecal matter. These important steps in the process of decomposition are: फिर फ्रेगमेंटेशन लिया, लीचिंग, काटा दैट इज कैटाबॉलिज्म, फिर लिया काटा, मिनरलाइजेशन, मैंने, हमने मैंने है, हमने मैंने, फिर लिया काटा, हमने मैंने, फिर लिया काटा, हमने मैंने, फिर फ्रेगमेंटेशन लिया, लीचिंग, काटा, कैटाबॉलिज्म, हमने ह्यूमिफिकेशन, एंड मैंने इज मिनरलाइजेशन. दीज आर द स्टेप्स ऑफ द डिकम्पोजिशन. Detritivores are the detritivores example or break down the detritus into that is the raw material for decomposition. Raw material of decomposition. Detritivores example earthworm break down the detritus into smaller particles. This process is called fragmentation. When the detritus is broken down into smaller particles, it is called fragmentation. By the process of leaching, fragmentation के बाद होती है leaching की वजह से कुछ water soluble inorganic nutrients go down into the soil horizon and get precipitated as the unavailable salts. And लीचिंग में क्या होता है? वाटर सॉल्युबल इनऑर्गेनिक न्यूट्रिएंट्स सीप करते हैं डाउन इन द सॉइल एंड वहाँ पे प्रेसिपिटेट होकर बनाते हैं साल्ट्स जिनको हम जो अनअवेलेबल होते हैं लेटर ऑन. उसके बाद बैक्टीरियल एंड द फंगल एंजाइम्स डिग्रेड द डेट्राइटस इनटू द सिंपल इनऑर्गेनिक सब्सटेंस. दिस इज कॉल्ड कैटाबॉलिज्म. डेट्रिवोर्स क्या करते हैं? वो ब्रेक डाउन करते हैं इनटू स्मॉल, इसको कहते हैं फ्रेगमेंटेशन. फ्रेगमेंटेशन के बाद लीचिंग होती है, दैट इज द सीपिंग डाउन ऑफ द insoluble inorganic nutrients into the soil and which can precipitate as the unavailable salts. उसके बाद बैक्टीरिया एंड द फंगल एंजाइम्स की वजह से डिग्रेड होता है फर्दर into simple inorganic substance, इसको कहते हैं हम कैटाबॉलिज्म. These are fragmentation, leaching, and catabolism. It is important to note that all the above steps, that is fragmentation, leaching, and catabolism, in decompose operate simultaneously on the detritus. Operate simultaneously on the अब जो मटेरियल था वो स्लीप हो गया डाउन इनटू द सॉइल. ह्यूमिफिकेशन एंड मिनरलाइजेशन ऑकर ड्यूरिंग द डिकम्पोजिशन इन द सॉइल. सॉइल में फिर होते हैं ह्यूमिफिकेशन, डिकम्पोजिशन. ये तीन स्टेप्स होते हैं इकट्ठे साइमल्टेनियसली, लेकिन जब सॉइल में न्यूट्रिएंट्स पहुंच जाते हैं तब वहाँ पे होती है फिर ह्यूमिफिकेशन एंड द मिनरलाइजेशन. ह्यूमिफिकेशन एंड मिनरलाइजेशन ऑकर ड्यूरिंग द डिकम्पोजिशन इन द सॉइल. सॉइल में जब डिकम्पोजिशन होती है इट्स कॉल्ड एज ए ह्यूमिफिकेशन एंड मिनरलाइजेशन. ह्यूमिफिकेशन में ह्यूमस बनता है, मिनरलाइजेशन में क्या होगा अभी पढ़ेंगे. डिकम्पोजिशन सिंपल इज द breakdown of the complex organic matter in the smaller organic forms. We have learned that the earthworm is the farmer's friend because it helps in the breakdown of the complex organic matter into simple inorganic forms and also helps in the loosening of the soil and also helps in the loosening of the soil. Losing of soil. Similarly, decomposers break down the complex organic matter into inorganic substances like the carbon dioxide, water, and nutrients, and the process is called the decomposition. Detritus, which acts as the detritus जो कि raw material act करता है. Detritus की definition है simply dead remains of plants and animals including the fecal matter. Detritus which acts as the raw material for the decomposition. Detritus को जो break करता है smaller fragments उनको कहते हैं हम detritivores, and the process is called the first step of decomposition is the fragmentation. उसके बाद फिर लीचिंग होती है. लीचिंग में क्या होता है? सॉल्युबल इनऑर्गेनिक साल्ट्स जो न्यूट्रिएंट्स होते हैं वो सीप करते हैं डीप इनटू द सॉइल, वहाँ पे फिर प्रेसिपिटेट होकर बनाते हैं अनअवेलेबल साल्ट्स. उसके बाद होती है कैटाबॉलिज्म की में फंगई एंड बैक्टीरिया जो एंजाइम्स की वजह से फर्दर ब्रेक डाउन करते हैं ऑर्गेनिक मॉलिक्यूल्स इन द सिंपल इनऑर्गेनिक फॉर्म्स, उसको कहते हैं हम कैटाबॉलिज्म. ये जो तीन स्टेप्स होते हैं दे ऑकर साइमल्टेनियसली, लेकिन जो ह्यूमिफिकेशन एंड मिनरलाइजेशन दे ऑकर लेटर ऑन in the decomposition during the decomposition in the soil. They occur later on during the decomposition in the soil. break down the complex organic matter as well as losing of the cells. When they decompose, break down the complex organic matter into non-special like the carbon dioxide, water, and the nutrients. In the process called decomposition, detritus transforms including the fecal matter. Very important यहाँ पे concept detritus and which is the raw material for decomposition, raw material for decomposition. Fragmentation, leaching, catabolism, humidification, and mineralization. फिर लिया काटा हमने मैंने fragmentation, leaching, catabolism, humidification, and mineralization. These are step by step. Detritus, earth and break down the detritus, small fragmentation, while leaching water soluble water soluble inorganic nutrients go deep into the soil and get precipitated as the unavailable salts. Bacterial and the fungal enzymes degrade detritus into the simple inorganic substances. This process is called catabolism. It is important to note that all the above steps in decomposition operate simultaneously on the detritus. Humidification and the mineralization occur during the decomposition of the soil. Humidification and mineralization occur during the decomposition in the soil. Humidification and mineralization occur during the decomposition in the soil. Humidification and mineralization occur during the decomposition in the soil. Humidification leads to the accumulation of a dark colored amorphous substance called humus that is highly resistant to microbial action and undergoes decomposition at an extremely slow rate. Humidification में क्या बनता है, इसमें humus बनता है. Humus is actually a dark colored amorphous substance जो highly resistant होता है to the microbial action and undergoes decomposition extremely at a slow rate. Humus actually acts as a reservoir of nutrients. Humidification step में humus बनता है. Humus is a dark colored amorphous substance which is highly resistant to microbial action and undergoes decomposition at a slow rate. Actually being colloidal in nature, it serves as a very very important point. Being colloidal, जो humus होता है, it is colloidal in nature. Being colloidal in nature, it acts as a reservoir of nutrients. Being colloidal in nature, it serves as a reservoir of nutrients. Accumulation of the dark colored amorphous substance called humus that is highly resistant to microbial action and undergoes decomposition at an extremely slow rate. Being colloidal in nature, it serves as a reservoir of nutrients. The humus is further degraded by some microbes and release the inorganic nutrients occur by the process called. उसके बाद humus भी degrade होता है, slowly degrade होता है, लेकिन degrade होता है with the help of certain microbes. उसके बाद ये nutrients होते हैं soil में जाते हैं. That's called as mineralization. Decomposition is largely an oxygen requiring process. जितना ऑक्सीजन अवेलेबल ज़्यादा होगा उतनी डिकम्पोजिशन की रेट ज़्यादा होगी. द रेट ऑफ डिकम्पोजिशन इज कंट्रोल्ड बाय द केमिकल कंपोजिशन ऑफ द डेट्राइट्स एंड द क्लाइमेटिक फैक्टर्स. इट डिपेंड्स अपॉन वेरियस फैक्टर्स. इट डिपेंड्स अपॉन द कंपोजिशन ऑफ डेट्राइट्स में कौन कौन सी चीज़ है उस पर डिपेंड करता है रेट ऑफ डिकम्पोजिशन, कितनी ज़्यादा तेज़ डिकम्पोजिशन होगी. पहली बात, डिकम्पोजिशन इज एन ऑक्सीजन रिक्वायरिंग प्रोसेस. जितना ऑक्सीजन अवेलेबिलिटी ज़्यादा होगा उतनी डिकम्पोजिशन ज़्यादा होगी. सेकंड पॉइंट, रेट ऑफ डिकम्पोजिशन डिपेंड्स अपॉन द केमिकल कंपोजिशन ऑफ डेट्राइट्स एज वेल एज द क्लाइमेटिक फैक्टर्स. अब कैसे डिपेंड करता है, इट्स सिंपल. Lignin or chitin, the rate of decomposition in a particular climatic condition, decomposition rate is slower if detritus is rich in decomposition rate is slow if detritus is rich in lignin and chitin, and quicker if detritus is rich in nitrogen and the water soluble substance like sugars. Simple. If the detritus is rich in lignin and chitin, decomposition की rate slow होती है. If the detritus is rich in sugars, if the detritus is rich in sugars या water soluble substance like sugars, तो decomposition की rate ज़्यादा होती है. Temperature and the soil moisture, these were the composition. Now the climatic factors. Temperature and the soil moisture are the most important climatic factors that regulate decomposition. जितना moisture ज़्यादा होगा, जितना temperature ज़्यादा moderate होगा, उतनी decomposition ज़्यादा होगी. Temperature and the moisture are the soil moisture, not atmospheric moisture, it is the soil moisture, are the most important climatic factors that regulate the decomposition through their effect on the activities on the soil, of the soil microbes. Directly नहीं, indirectly affect करते हैं. Temperature and soil moisture are the most important factors. Temperature and the soil moisture are the two most important factors that regulate decomposition, not directly but through their effect on the soil microbes. That cause warm and moist environment factor favor decomposition, whereas low temperature and anaerobic gases inhibit decomposition, resulting in the build of the organic materials. Simply decomposition कौन किस factor पे depend करता है. The first one is oxygen, the second one is the composition of the detritus. Lignin अगर और chitin अगर होगा तो decomposition की rate slow होगी, and अगर शुगर एंड नाइट्रोजन एंड शुगर होगा तो डिकम्पोजिशन की रेट ज़्यादा होगी. इसके अलावा इट डिपेंड्स ऑन टेम्परेचर एंड मॉइस्चर. सॉइल मॉइस्चर आर मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट फैक्टर्स, बट दे डू नॉट अफेक्ट डायरेक्टली डिकम्पोजिशन बट थ्रू देयर इफेक्ट ऑन द soil microbes. Warm and the moist environment factors and the warm temperature say decomposition ज़्यादा फेवर होती है। अगर लो टेम्परेचर और एनारोबिक कंडीशन होगी तो डिकम्पोजिशन इनहिबिट होगी या रेट ऑफ डिकम्पोजिशन कम होगी। तो दिस वाज डिकम्पोजिशन। डिकम्पोजिशन में कुछ स्टेप्स हमने पढ़े, फ्रेगमेंटेशन, लीचिंग, कैटाबॉलिज्म, ह्यूमिफिकेशन, मिनरलाइजेशन। उसके बाद हमने पढ़ा फैक्टर्स अफेक्टिंग डिकम्पोजिशन, डेट्राइटस किसे कहते हैं, डेट्राइटस में क्या क्या आता है, डेट्रिवोर्स किसे कहते हैं, ठीक है, अर्थवर्म को क्यों कहते हैं एज अ फार्मर, वो भी पढ़ा इसमें। नाउ इट इज़ एनर्जी फ्लो। पहले ही हमने पढ़ा था पहली लाइन में, देयर इज अ यूनिडायरेक्शनल फ्लो ऑफ एनर्जी थ्रू द ट्रॉपिक लेवल्स, यूनिडायरेक्शनल फ्लो ऑफ एनर्जी एक्सेप्ट फॉर द डीप सी हाइड्रोथर्मल इकोसिस्टम। एक्सेप्ट फॉर द डीप सी, जो बहुत ही डीप होते हैं हाइड्रोथर्मल, वहाँ पे जनरली रेड अलगा प्रेजेंट होते हैं, डीप अलगा जिन्हें कहते हैं। एक्सेप्ट फॉर द डीप सी हाइड्रोथर्मल इकोसिस्टम, सन इज द ओनली सोर्स ऑफ द एनर्जी ऑफ ऑल द इकोसिस्टम्स ऑन अर्थ। एक्सेप्शन यहाँ पे है। ऑफ द इंसिडेंट सोलर रेडिएशन लेस देन 50% ऑफ इट, अगर टोटल है 100% एनर्जी, उसमें 50% से कम होती है वो लाइट या वो एनर्जी जो फोटोसिंथेसिस के लिए हम यूज़ कर सकते हैं। ऑफ इट इज़ फोटोसिंथेटिकली एक्टिव रेडिएशन। वी नो दैट प्लांट्स एंड द फोटोसिंथेटिक बैक्टीरिया दैट ऑटोट्रॉफिस फिक्स सन radiant energy to make the food from the simple inorganic material, that's photosynthesis. Plants capture only 2 to 10% of PAR, एंड दिस स्मॉल अमाउंट फोटोसिंथेसिस के लिए कितना लगता है, 2 to 10%। फोटोसिंथेटिकली एक्टिव रेडिएशन होता है 50%, लेकिन खाली 2 to 10% ऑफ फोटोसिंथेटिकली एक्टिव रेडिएशन, दैट इज 1 to 5% ऑफ द टोटल सोलर रेडिएशन जो यूज करते हैं प्लांट्स फॉर फोटोसिंथेसिस। दिस स्मॉल अमाउंट ऑफ एनर्जी, दिस स्मॉल इज रेस्पॉन्सिबल फॉर द लाइफ ऑन अर्थ, इज रेस्पॉन्सिबल फॉर द लाइफ ऑन अर्थ। पहले हमने पढ़ा एक्सेप्ट फॉर द डीप सी हाइड्रोथर्मल इकोसिस्टम, सन इज ओनली सोर्स ऑफ एनर्जी ऑफ ऑल द इकोसिस्टम्स। ऑफ द इंसिडेंट टोटल रेडिएशन जो इंसिडेंट होते हैं उसमें खाली लेस देन 50% इंसिडेंट रेडिएशन इज इट इज़ फोटोसिंथेटिकली एक्टिव रेडिएशन। उस फोटोसिंथेटिकली एक्टिव रेडिएशन में खाली 1 से 2% 2 से 10% ऑफ द फोटोसिंथेटिक एक्टिव रेडिएशन प्लांट यूज करते हैं फॉर फोटोसिंथेसिस, दैट दिस मीन इज 1 to 5% ऑफ टोटल सोलर रेडिएशन, 1 to 5%। सो इट्स वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट टू नो हाउ द सोलर एनर्जी कैप्चर्ड बाय प्लांट्स flows through the different organisms of an ecosystem. All organisms are dependent for their food on producers either directly or indirectly. So find a direct unidirectional flow of energy from the sun to producers and then to consumers. The unidirectional flow of energy from sun to producers. इंपॉर्टेंट पॉइंट है 1 to 5, ये आ सकता है 1 to 5 ऑफ द टोटल सोलर रेडिएशन जो होता है इट इज़ ये यूज़ करते हैं प्लांट्स फॉर फोटोसिंथेसिस। लेकिन जो फोटोसिंथेटिकली एक्टिव रेडिएशन इट इज़ लेस देन 50%, it is less than 50%, except for the deep sea hydrogen when sun is all source of energy 50%, is less than 50%, it's not approx, it is less than 50%. It's photosynthetic active radiation. We know the plants photosynthetic bacteria plants capture only 2 to 10% of the PAR, that's 1 to 5% of the all organisms dependent on directly or indirectly. So there is a unidirectional flow of energy. Simple. Further, ecosystems are not exempt from the cycle of thermodynamics. Then there any constant supply of energy to synthesize the molecule they require to counteract the universal tendency to the increasing disorder liness. A constant supply of energy आता है from the solar energy, फिर वो देता है फोटोसिंथेसिस से ATP बनता है, फिर वो फ्लो करता है। The green plants in the ecosystem are called producers. Simple बचपन से पढ़ा है। In a terrestrial ecosystem, major producers are herbivores, woody plants. Likewise, producers in an ecosystem are various like the phytoplanktons होते हैं producers, algae and the higher plants होते हैं producers in the aquatic ecosystem. Simple. You have read about the food chains and the webs that exist in it, starting from the plants or the producers. Food chains or the rather webs are formed inside an animal feeds on a plant on other. जब interaction करते हैं, जब energy flow होती है, जब food के तौर पर एक दूसरे से energy flow होती है through the ecosystem, it's called food web, food chain respectively. The chain or a web is formed because of interdependency of the organisms in a particular ecosystem. The chain or a web is formed because of interdependency, because no energy that is trapped in an organism remains in it forever. No energy that is trapped in an organism remains in it forever. The energy trapped by the producer hence is either passed on to a consumer or to the organism dies. Death of the organism is the beginning of the detritus, that is the food chain or the food web, detritus food chain. Good, death is not the end, not the ending always, it can be a beginning. Death of the organism is the beginning of the detritus food chain. Death, even death is not the ending, even death is not the ending, so keep hustling. You have read that the food chains and webs that exist in the structure of plants occur due to the interdependency. No energy that is trapped in organism remains in it forever. The energy trapped in the production, death of the organism is the beginning of the detritus food chain. All animals depend on the plants directly, इसलिए producer में पड़ा, producer में आते हैं हमारे aquatic ecosystem में phytoplanktons, algae and higher plants. Terrestrial ecosystem में herbaceous and the woody plants are the major producers. The food chains and the food web, these interactions occur due to the interdependency. No energy that is trapped in organism remains in it forever. Death of the organism is the beginning of the detritus food chain. Death of the organism is the beginning of the detritus food chain. इंटरडिपेंडेंस की वजह से आता है. फाइटोप्लैंक्टन, algae and higher plants and herbivores in the decomposition. All animals depend on the plants directly for the food needs. They are called as consumers. Simple, also and also called heterotrophs. They feed if they feed producers. The plants are called primary consumers, and if the animal eat other animals, they are called as secondary consumers. Likewise, you would have tertiary consumers too. Obviously, the primary consumers will be herbivores. Some common herbivores are insects, birds, mammals in tertiary ecosystem, and the molluscs. Molluscs होते हैं aquatic ecosystem. Molluscus is a herbivore. Mollusca is a herbivore. Mollusca is a herbivore. It's called as primary consumer. Herbivore को ही primary consumer कहते हैं. Herbivore को primary consumer, herbivore, second trophic level. The consumers that feed on these herbivores are called carnivores. जो consumer, जो secondary consumer होगा, that would be always a carnivore. यहाँ पे हम note लिखेंगे, secondary consumer is always a carnivore. और जो सेकेंडरी कंज्यूमर है ये किसको खाएगा? हर्बीवर को. Mollusca is a herbivore in aquatic ecosystem. Insects, birds, and mammals. The consumers that feed on these herbivores are called carnivores, or more called primary carnivores, though called secondary consumers. Primary carnivore is a secondary consumer. Primary consumer food labeled secondary carnivores. A simple grazing food chain is depicted in below. The detritus food chain. There are two types of food chain. The first one is the detritus food chain, and the second one is grazing food chain. Detritus food chain starts from the detritus. That's the detritus is the beginning of the detritus food chain. The death of the plant is the beginning of the detritus food chain. Therefore, the detritus food chain begins with the dead organic matter, which is called as detritus. Dead organic matter is called as detritus. It is made up of decomposers, which are heterotrophic organisms, mainly fungi and bacteria. They meet their energy and nutrient requirements by the degrading dead organic matter, and they meet their energy requirement by degrading dead organic matter and detritus. These are also known as saprotrophs. Decomposers secrete digestive enzymes that break down dead and waste minerals into simple inorganic materials, which are subsequently absorbed by them. This is called saprotrophs. Detritus food chain में जो रॉ मटीरियल इट इज डेट्राइट्स पे एक्ट करके उसकी डिग्रेडेशन करती है विद द हेल्प ऑफ द एंजाइम्स, और वहाँ से फिर एनर्जी द सोर्स ऑफ एनर्जी इज दिस डेट्राइट्स. स्टार्टिंग एनर्जी यहाँ से निकलती है. The detritus food chain begins with the dead organic matter. It is made up of decomposers, mainly bacteria and fungi. They meet their energy requirement by the degrading dead organic matter or detritus. They are also known as saprotrophs. Decomposers secrete digestive enzymes that break down the dead and the waste materials into the simple inorganic materials, which are subsequently absorbed by them. In an aquatic ecosystem, another one is grazing food chain. It starts from the plant. Grazing food chain starts from a plant. इन एन एक्वेटिक इकोसिस्टम, अभी एक्वेटिक इकोसिस्टम टेरेस्ट्रियल इकोसिस्टम में मेन जो फ्लो ऑफ एनर्जी कहाँ किसके थ्रू होती है? इन द एक्वेटिक इकोसिस्टम ग्रेजिंग फूड चेन इज द मेजर कंड्यूट ऑफ एनर्जी, इज द मेजर सोर्स ऑफ फ्लो ऑफ एनर्जी, इज द मेजर ग्रेजिंग फूड. वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट पॉइंट, वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. इन एन एक्वेटिक इकोसिस्टम ग्रेजिंग फूड चेन इज द मेजर कंड्यूट फॉर द एनर्जी फ्लो. ग्रेजिंग फूड चेन इज द मेजर कंड्यूट फॉर द एनर्जी फ्लो. ग्रेजिंग फूड चेन इज द मेजर conduit for energy flow. As against this, in a terrestrial ecosystem, a much larger fraction of the energy flows through the detritus food chain than the grazing food chain. Therefore, detritus food chain is the major conduit of energy in the terrestrial ecosystem. Grazing food chain is the major conduit of energy in the aquatic ecosystem. Detritus food chain may be connected with the grazing food chain at some levels. Some of the organisms of detritus food chain are prey to the grazing food chain and natural ecosystem. Some animals like cockroaches, crows, which are the omnivores. These natural interconnection of the food chains make it a food web. Omnivores, when जब दो food chain में कोई एक component common होता है because of presence of a omnivore, this is called as the food web. Food web occurs due to the natural interconnection of the food chains makes the food web. These natural interconnection of food chains makes it a food web. In an aquatic ecosystem, grazing food chain is the major conduit for the energy flow. As against this, in a terrestrial ecosystem, the majority of the energy gets flows through the detritus food chain. Grazing food chain major for aquatic ecosystem है detritus food chain होती है. The food chains को आपस में connect करते हैं. Omnivores like cockroach is an omnivore, crow is an omnivore, and बनाते हैं इस food chains को interconnect food chains को food web बनाते हैं. इनको food web. ऑर्गेनिजम्स ऑक्यूपाई अ प्लेस, एक नेचुरल एनवायरनमेंट में, एक पर्टिकुलर फूड चेन में एक ऑर्गेनिज्म एक पर्टिकुलर लेवल ऑक्यूपाई करते हैं जिसको हम ट्रॉपिक लेवल कहते हैं। फॉर एग्जांपल प्राइमरी जो प्रोड्यूसर्स होते हैं उनको फर्स्ट ट्रॉपिक लेवल, उसके बाद हर्बीवोर जिसको प्राइमरी कंज्यूमर कहते हैं, दैट इज द सेकंड ट्रॉपिक लेवल, उसके बाद सेकेंडरी कंज्यूमर जिसको हम प्राइमरी कार्निवोर कहते हैं, इट इज द थर्ड ट्रॉपिक लेवल, एंड सो ऑन इज द ट्रॉपिक लेवल। Producers belong to first and so on and so simple. Crow, cockroach, these are the omnivores that connect different food chains and makes it a food web. Grazing food chain is the major conduit of the flow of energy in the aquatic ecosystem. Detritus food chain is the major conduit of energy flow in the terrestrial ecosystem. Detritus food chain begins with the detritus mainly occur decomposers होते हैं, source of energy होता है, breakdown of the detritus mainly होते हैं bacteria and the fungi, bacteria and fungi इनको saprotrophs भी कहते हैं क्योंकि ये digestive enzymes secrete करते हैं, फिर उन enzymes की वजह से breakdown करते हैं detritus को और फिर absorb करते हैं through the body surface. It's a made of decomposers mainly bacteria and fungi. The main energy requirement, they need energy and the nutrient requirement by the degrading. They are also known as saprotrophs. They are also known as saprotrophs. Enzyme breakdown in the grazing food chain. In the aquatic ecosystem, grazing food chain is a major quantity of energy in the detritus food chain through the terrestrial ecosystem and detritus food chain की तरफ होते हैं. Crow, cockroach and the crow, which are the omnivores, they are interconnections of the food chain makes it a food web. Tropic level होता है एक particular level place in a food chain. Simple, it's not typical, it is simple. The important point to note is that the amount of energy decreases at successive tropic levels. Very important point. Amount of energy, जैसे हम ऊपर tropic levels में चढ़ेंगे, amount of energy decreases. That's primary productivity is greater than secondary productivity, amount of energy decreases. Only 10% of energy is transferred, 90% is lost. अगर हमारे पास primary first tropic level है A, second tropic level is B, third tropic level is C, इसके बाद पास है input आया 1000 joules, ये इसको खाली इसका 10% फ्लो करेगा, दैट इज 100 जूल्स, ये इसका खाली 10% फ्लो करेगा, दैट इज 10, इसके बाद होगा 10 जूल्स, इसके पास होगा 100 जूल्स, इसके पास 1000 जूल्स को जैसे हम आगे आगे बढ़ेंगे ट्रॉपिक लेवल्स में एनर्जी डिक्रीज हो जाती है 10% ला 10% ला, शायद लिंक मैंने दिया था. The important point to note that amount of the energy decreases at the successive tropic levels. When an organism dies, it is converted to detritus, so that it serves as a source for decomposed organism. Each tropic level depends on the at the lower tropic level. Each tropic level has a certain mass of living matter at a particular time. It's called as a standing crop. यहाँ पे confusion है standing crop और standing state में. वहाँ पे देखो अमाउंट ऑफ बायोमास स्टैंडिंग क्रॉप भी होता है, स्टैंडिंग स्टेट भी होता है. स्टैंडिंग स्टेट होता है अमाउंट ऑफ बायोमास इन सॉइल, स्टैंडिंग स्टेट स्टेट में आता है एस होता है सॉइल, और स्टैंडिंग क्रॉप तो वहाँ पे रहा स्टैंडिंग क्रॉप, तो कन्फ्यूजन गायब, एक याद रहा दूसरे याद रखने की ज़रूरत नहीं है, सिंपल. स्टैंडिंग क्रॉप होता है अमाउंट ऑफ बायोमास और लिविंग मैटर एट अ पर्टिकुलर टाइम इन पर्टिकुलर ट्रॉपिक लेवल में कितना उसको स्टैंडिंग क्रॉप कहते हैं. और स्टैंडिंग स्टेट में रखना है याद एस, स्टैंडिंग स्टेट soil, amount of biomass in a soil at a particular time. Standing crop होता है a particular tropic level. The standing crop is measured as a mass of living biomass or the number in a particular. It can be measured in number or it can be measured in mass. Mass, that is gram per meter square. That is unit of standing crop can be gram per meter square or number per meter square. Gram per meter square या number per meter square. The biomass of a species is expressed in terms of freshwater dry weight. Measurement of the biomass in terms of dry weight is more accurate. In terms of dry weight, measurement of the biomass in terms of dry weight is more accurate. Measurement of biomass in terms of dry weight is more accurate. Each tropic level has a certain mass of living material in a particular time called as a standing crop. The standing crop is measured in terms of or a living mass or biomass or number per unit area. Therefore, its unit can be gram per meter square or the number per meter square. It can measure in terms of dry weight or the fresh weight, but measurement in terms of dry weight is more accurate. The number of tropic levels in the grazing food chain is restricted as the energy flows through 10% log. Restricted. बहुत tropic levels नहीं हो सकते क्योंकि it follows 10% log. Only 10% of the energy flows to the next tropic level. 90% gets lost. Simple. Only 10% of the energy is transferred to the each tropic level from the lower tropic level. In nature, it is possible to have some levels, producers, many levels, producers, primary corner, secondary corner, and grazing food chain. Do you think that there is such limitation in detritus food chain? There are certain limitations of detritus food chain. Transfer energy follows 10%. Only 10% of the energy is transferred to the east tropic level from the lower tropic level. In nature, it is possible to have so many levels, producers, herbivores, primary, secondary, corner, and grazing food chain. Do you think there is such limitation on detritus food chain में ज़्यादा tropic levels नहीं होते हैं. Simply detritus food chain में ज़्यादा tropic level नहीं होते हैं क्योंकि वहाँ पे energy उतनी ज़्यादा नहीं होता as compared to plants. उसके बाद है ecological pyramids. Ecological pyramids हमने पढ़ा, energy flow हमने पढ़ा, हमने पढ़ा पहले डिकम्पोजिशन, पहले पढ़ा प्रोडक्टिविटी, उसके बाद पढ़ा डिकम्पोजिशन, उसके बाद पढ़ा एनर्जी फ्लो। अब हम पढ़ेंगे इकोलॉजिकल पायरामिड्स। यू मस्ट बी फैमिलियर, इकोलॉजिकल पायरामिड होता है पायरामिड ऑफ द ट्रॉपिक लेवल। सिंपली पायरामिड ऑफ ट्रॉपिक लेवल, बेस ऑफ पायरामिड होता है ब्रॉड, रिप्रेजेंट्स प्रोड्यूसर्स, उसके बाद कंज्यूमर्स, उसके बाद उस प्रोड्यूसर्स, उसके बाद प्राइमरी कंज्यूमर, सेकेंडरी कंज्यूमर एंड सो ऑन। सिंपली अ पायरामिड, ट्रॉपिक लेवल उसका पायरामिड, जिसको हम इकोलॉजिकल पायरामिड कहते हैं। ब्रॉड इज द बेस जनरली ब्रॉड। अब पढ़ेंगे इन्वर्टेड होता है, अपराइट एंड सो ऑन। You must be familiar with the shape of the pyramid. The base of the pyramid is broad and it narrows towards the apex. One gets a similar shape whether you express the food or energy relationship between organisms. Food or energy relationship between organisms. Food or energy, ecological pyramid होता है किसका, food या energy relationship between the organisms. Food or energy relationship, food या energy relationship between the organisms. Food or energy relationship between the organisms at different trophic levels. This relationship is expressed in terms of number, या तो pyramid of number या pyramid of biomass या pyramid of energy. Pyramid of number, pyramid of biomass, pyramid of energy. The base of each pyramid represents the producers of each first tropic level, tertiary and top level, so on. The three ecological pyramids that are usually standard are pyramid of number, pyramid of biomass, and the pyramid of energy. Pyramid of number, pyramid of in terms of number of tropic, number of, for example, producers. Pyramid of number की example दी गई है. Number in grassland ecosystem is upright. It's upright, it's inverted. Pyramid of biomass in aquatic ecosystem is always inverted. Biomass in aquatic, pyramid of the biomass in aquatic ecosystem is all inverted. दो पॉइंट यहाँ पे याद रखने की जरूरत है, दो पॉइंट वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट पॉइंट. एक तो pyramid of energy is always upright. दूसरा पॉइंट pyramid of biomass in aquatic ecosystem is always inverted. Pyramid of energy is always upright. Pyramid of biomass in aquatic ecosystem is always inverted. This pyramid of biomass shows a sharp decrease in biomass at heterotropic level. Symbol pyramid inverted. Pyramid of the biomass of the small standing crop of phytoplankton is supporting the large standing crop of small crop of phytoplankton. Inverted का मतलब होता है this. मतलब ये है phytoplankton, small. ये है zooplankton, large. It represents the pyramid of biomass in the aquatic ecosystem. Pyramid of biomass in aquatic ecosystem. Any calculation of the energy content, an ideal pyramid of energy is always upright. Observe the primary producers convert 1% of the energy. Any calculation of the energy content biomass or the numbers, we must have to take all the organisms at a particular tropic level. हम कोई यहाँ पे कोई general assumptions नहीं ले सकते for drawing the, for making the, for examining the ecological pyramids. We cannot draw random assumption हम नहीं ले सकते. Random assumptions हम नहीं. We must have to take all the organisms at a particular tropic level, at a particular tropic level. There is no generalization. Any calculations of the energy content biomass or the numbers has to include all organisms at a tropic level. No generalization will make it true if we take the few individuals at any tropic level. So we must have take all the organisms at a particular tropic level. No generalization. We cannot generalize in general. See. One must remember that the tropic level represents the functional level, not a species as such. It represents a functional level. Tropic level represents a functional level, not a species as such. A given species may occupy more than one tropic level in the same ecosystem at the same time. It represents the function, not a species. A given species can occupy more than one tropic levels at the same time in a given ecosystem. For example, a sparrow is a primary consumer. Species can occupy simple tropic level represents a functional level, not a species. A species can occupy more than one tropic levels in the same ecosystem. A given species may occupy more than one tropic level in the same ecosystem at the same time. For example, sparrow can occupy primary consumer seeds or consumer insects or vermin. In most ecosystems, all pyramids of number, energy, and are most of the ecosystems pyramids are generally upright. Producers are more in number, biomass of person. Also, the energy at lower tropic level and is more in the tropic level. There are exceptions to the generalization. If you were to count the number of insects feeding on a big tree, तब तो kind of energy you would get it's inverted, I guess, simply. Now estimate the large birds eating the smaller. The pyramid of the biomass in the sea is generally inverted a paradox because the biomass of fishes far exceeds the biomass of nectarines. Is it a paradox? Pyramid of energy is always upright, can never be inverted because the energy flows 10% law. Always flows. Each bar in the energy parameter indicates the energy present at each tropic in the given time or annually or per unit area. Annually per unit area. Annually per unit area. Any calculations of energy content biomass or the number, we must have take all the organisms at a particular tropic level, no generalization. Also, one must remember that tropic level represents the functional level, not a species level. A given species can occupy more than one tropic level in the same ecosystem at the same time. For example, a spear occupying primary consumer pyramids of number. Most ecosystem में pyramids होते हैं upright. Pyramid of biomass in the sea is generally inverted. Pyramid of energy is always upright, can never be inverted. ये कुछ पॉइंट्स यहाँ पे याद रखना, एक तो ये यहाँ से ज़्यादा नहीं. However, there are certain limitations of the ecological pyramid. They do not take into account the detritus food chain. They do not take into account the decomposers. तो फूड वेब्स का जिक्र ही नहीं करते हैं. वो कहते हैं सिंपल फूड चेन्स होते हैं, विच इज़ ऑलमोस्ट रेयर होता है बहुत ज़्यादा. इट डज नॉट टेक into account the same species belonging to two or more tropic levels. Same species belonging to two or more tropic. It does not take into account the same species belonging to two or more tropic levels. There are certain exceptions to the ecological pyramids. Directly ask the question, which are the following is an exception to ecological pyramid. The first one is it does not take into account the same species belong to the two or more tropic levels. Assumes a simple food chain, something almost never exists in nature. It does not account for. Moreover, saprophytes are not given any place in the ecological pyramids, even though play important role in ecosystem. Three main, there are three main exceptions, or we can say that disadvantages, or we can say that limits of the ecological pyramid. The first one is इकोलॉजिकल pyramids do not take into account the same species. एक species वो उस species का जिक्र ही नहीं करते जो species एक ही टाइम पर एक से ज़्यादा tropic levels को occupy करते. The second one is they assume simple food chain that never exists actually. वो food web का जिक्र ही नहीं करते हैं. The third one is saprophytes are not given any space. Saprophytes को कोई जगह नहीं दी गई है in ecological pyramids. Saprophytes are not given any space in the ecological pyramids. Are not given any space. There are three basic limitations. याद रखना है. पहले ही it does not take into account the same species occupying the more one tropic levels. It is a simple food chain. It does not accommodate food web. The third one is saprophytes are not given any place. Saprophytes are not given any place. Minutes. I think it will complete ecological succession. Ecological succession कितना टाइम अभी नहीं होगा आज, कल करेंगे अब. ecological succession इंशाल्लाह कल करेंगे हम. आधा चैप्टर रहेगा, ये आधा चैप्टर कल करेंगे हम कंप्लीट. तो इकोलॉजिकल सक्सेशन और न्यूट्रन साइकिलिंग होगा कल कंप्लीट. आज के लिए इतना रखेंगे.